Look at this old soldier, can't even carry his own tray. Yeah, he's probably faking it just to get the discount. The mocking words echoed through the quiet diner, but they hit deeper than anyone realized. Ray Dawson, a war veteran, kept moving step by slow step, each one carrying the weight of countless memories. Will one act of respect change everything? They had no idea what this man had endured, what he had sacrificed to stand here today. But what happens when another soldier stands up, not with words, but with a simple silent act? The diner will fall silent and everything will change forever. Welcome to Graceful Valor Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. Every Sunday at precisely 9:15 a.m., Ray Dawson, a 78-year-old veteran of the Marines, stepped into Molly's Diner on Walnut Street in Washington City. The diner, nestled among the quieter streets of town, was a staple for locals, a place where the coffee was always hot, the eggs were always over easy, and the familiar faces made it feel like home. For 12 years, Marissa, the waitress, had served Ray his usual breakfast: 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast with no butter, and a steaming cup of black coffee. She knew him well, just as she knew the ins and outs of every customer that frequented the diner. Every Sunday, Ray took the same seat in the back corner near the window where the early morning light filtered in, casting a warm glow over his table. It was his place of peace, his moment of solitude before the world picked up its pace for the day. Ray didn't speak much to others, his movements were slow and deliberate, a testament to the spinal injury he had suffered in Vietnam when his helicopter crashed. Though the doctors had told him he would never walk again, Ray had defied the odds. He still carried himself with a quiet, unwavering strength, his cane a constant companion. He never asked for help, he never needed to. Independence was his creed, something he had clung to ever since the war. As Ray entered the diner, he nodded to Jenny, the hostess who had always greeted him with a friendly smile. "Morning, Sergeant Dawson, your usual is ready," she said, knowing exactly what he wanted. Without a word, Ray acknowledged her with a simple nod and made his way to a seat in the back corner, carefully balancing the tray with both hands. The diner, bustling with the quiet murmur of early risers, carried on as usual, but for Ray, it was a place where the world seemed to slow down, if only for an hour. The noise, the demands, the memories, all of it faded into the background as he sat at his table. He wasn't there to engage in conversation, he wasn't there for the crowd, he was there for the stillness, the rhythm of the familiar. His Sunday routine. As Ray sat, his cane resting beside him, his eyes caught a familiar figure. Marissa approached his table with a fresh pot of coffee. "Would you like a refill, Mr. Dawson?" she asked politely. Ray met her eyes with a silent acknowledgement, his face etched with the marks of time and experience. He nodded once, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at his lips. It wasn't much, but it was all that was needed. The silence between them was comfortable, familiar. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes. Ray, with his weathered hands, gently poured the coffee into his cup. He looked out the window, watching the world outside move at its pace. For him, the world had been moving fast for far too long. Today, he allowed himself the luxury of slowing down. But as he sipped his coffee, the quiet routine was soon interrupted. A group of 4 men sitting in the booth across the room began laughing loudly. They were wearing fishing tournament shirts, a little out of place for the early hour, their voices dripping with mockery. "Look at this one," one of the men sneered loud enough for Ray to hear. "Takes 10 minutes just to cross a room." The laughter followed, and although Ray didn't react outwardly, it stung. He had grown accustomed to the mocking over the years. To the world, he was just an old man with a cane, a relic of another time. But for Ray, the dignity he carried inside was something that no one could take from him. He continued to eat his breakfast, each movement methodical, each bite deliberate. Despite his injury, despite the years of service, Ray refused to allow anyone to see him as weak. He had lived his life on his own terms, and today he would continue to do so. But the teasing didn't stop. As Ray finished his eggs, his fork slipped off the tray and clattered to the floor. His hand trembled slightly as he bent down to pick it up, and that's when the comment came again. "I'd help," one of the men mocked. "But I don't do cosplay." Marines. Ray paused, his back slightly hunched as he considered the fallen fork. It wasn't just the fork that bothered him, it was the lack of help, the lack of respect. But he did what he had done so many times before. He bent down slowly without making a scene and retrieved the fork himself. As Ray straightened up, Marissa approached, her expression tight with frustration. She bent down, took the fork from Ray's hand, and placed a new one on his plate. "I'm sorry about that, Mr. Dawson," she said softly, casting a glance at the group of men. Ray didn't look at her. Instead, he met her eyes for a brief moment, his expression unchanged. "Not your fault, Marissa," he said, his voice steady and calm. It was a simple exchange, but in that moment, Ray had already shown more grace than anyone in the diner that day. He hadn't responded with anger, he hadn't made a scene, he had simply lived his truth quietly and with dignity. What powerful moment will shift the diner's mood? Stay tuned on Graceful Valor Stories. And in doing so, he showed everyone in the room what real strength looked like. Ray entered Molly's diner as he did every Sunday morning, with the same quiet routine and the same calm demeanor. The doorbell jingled above him as he walked in, and the familiar scent of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air. It was the kind of comfort that Ray had come to rely on, the consistency that made each Sunday feel the same. But today, there was something different. A group of 4 men sat at a booth near the door, their voices loud and their laughter even louder. They were drinking beer, an odd choice for such an early hour, but no one seemed to mind. Their conversation was filled with the typical banter of a Sunday morning hangover, loud, coarse, and oblivious to the world around them. But as Ray moved across the diner, heading toward the self-service counter, their tone shifted. One of them spoke first, his voice carrying across the room. "Look at this guy," he sneered, eyeing Ray as he carefully made his way across the floor. "Can't even carry his own tray." Pathetic. Ray didn't acknowledge that. His eyes remained forward, focused on the task at hand, getting his breakfast. But the mocking didn't stop there. The laughter continued, growing louder, and the comments became more personal. "Yeah, he's just pretending to be hurt to get the veterans discount," another man chimed in, his words dripping with mockery. Ray's hand tightened around his cane, but he kept walking, each step slow but deliberate, as if he hadn't heard a thing. "Why doesn't he just go home and rest anyway?" the 4th man said, his voice sharp with contempt. The words cut through the quiet hum of the diner, but Ray refused to show that he had heard them. His focus was on reaching the counter, on getting his meal, on keeping his routine intact. Marissa, who had been serving Ray for years, heard every word. She stood frozen behind the counter, the coffee pot in her hand forgotten. She had always admired Ray's quiet strength, his independence, but today, she felt a twinge of guilt. She knew these men had seen them come in for months, always with the same loud attitude, but Ray had been nothing but polite, nothing but a man who deserved respect. Her fingers tightened around the pot as she listened to the men continue, each comment more cruel than the last. She had always been taught to keep her distance from trouble, to smile through the awkward moments, but today felt different. She wanted to say something to defend Ray, but she didn't know how. Her gaze shifted around the diner, watching the other customers. They too were aware of what was happening, but no one moved to intervene. The room was thick with discomfort, yet it remained eerily silent. Ray reached the counter, his movements slow and precise, never faltering despite the jabs thrown his way. As he reached the self-service area, his cane clicked against the floor, and he steadied himself, placing his tray down with a practiced hand. His eyes never wavered from his task, never acknowledging the cruelty that had been hurled at him. The laughter from the corner booth continued, but it had begun to lose its bite. The comments became quieter, less frequent, as though the words had lost their power in the face of Ray's quiet strength. But the group at the booth didn't stop there. As Ray bent slightly to pick up his fork, one of the men from the booth chuckled again, louder this time. "What's the matter, Marine, too weak to pick up a fork now?" Ray's hand trembled slightly as he reached down, but he didn't flinch. He didn't stop. He simply continued, each motion steady, unwavering, as if he had practiced this many times before. He picked up the fork and straightened his back, never breaking his calm demeanor. Marissa couldn't bear to watch anymore. She walked over quickly and placed a new fork on Ray's table, glancing at the men in the booth with disapproval. The group fell silent at her approach, but she didn't care. She could feel the weight of their words, and she knew Ray could feel them, too. He wasn't the only one who deserved respect here. They all did. "Sorry about that, Mr. Dawson," Marissa said softly, her voice low but sincere. She didn't meet Ray's eyes, not out of shame, but because she didn't need to. He didn't need her to say anything more. He knew. They both knew. Ray looked up, his eyes briefly meeting hers, and gave a small nod. His expression didn't change. There was no anger, no frustration, just that quiet strength that seemed to define him. "Not your fault, Marissa," he said calmly, as if it were the simplest truth in the world. He turned his attention back to his meal, cutting his eggs with slow, measured movements. The laughter from the corner booth had quieted, and the room felt lighter, though only just. Ray had never expected a scene. He had never asked for anyone to step in for him, but by simply continuing with his routine, by not letting the taunts disturb his peace, he had already won. The mocking had lost its power the moment Ray had chosen not to respond. Marissa walked back to the counter, her heart heavy, but her mind clearer than it had been moments ago. She knew Ray didn't need defending. He didn't need anyone to fight his battles for him, but she also knew that today she had witnessed something more than just an old man eating his breakfast. She had seen a quiet form of resilience that few people ever truly understood, and that more than anything had earned him her respect. What unexpected hero will step forward next? Keep watching on Graceful Valor Stories. In the far corner of Molly's diner, a figure sat quietly observing the scene. Colonel James Harrison, a retired Army officer, had entered the diner earlier that morning on his way to Washington for a briefing at the Pentagon. He was in no rush, taking a moment to enjoy a quiet breakfast before the day's events unfolded. As soon as Ray had walked in, Harrison's sharp eyes had immediately recognized him, even though there was a generation gap between them. Something about Ray's demeanor, his bearing, Reminded Harrison of his own time in the military. The veteran's quiet strength stood out in a room full of noise. Harrison had seen the mockery from the group of men in the corner, he had heard the laughter, the cruel words aimed at Ray as he made his way through the diner. The taunt stung, and for a moment, Harrison's jaw clenched in response. He had been in situations like this before, had witnessed men like Ray enduring ridicule with grace, but it never sat well with him. He knew the importance of respect for those who had served, and he knew that silence often spoke louder than words. While the others continued to laugh, Harrison's response was not one of shouting, not one of confrontation. He didn't need to say anything to make his point. He stood up slowly, his military posture as crisp as ever, and without a word, made his way across the diner. His footsteps were steady, purposeful, cutting through the growing tension in the room. The men at the booth didn't notice at first, but when Harrison approached Ray's table, their chatter faltered. They hadn't expected someone like him, dressed in a sharp military uniform with the insignia of a colonel, to be involved. It was the kind of presence that demanded attention, not by force, but by sheer authority. Harrison didn't stop when he reached Ray's table. Without saying a word, he bent down and retrieved the fork Ray had dropped. He placed it gently on the edge of Ray's plate and then stood, but instead of returning to his seat, Harrison did something that would change the atmosphere in the room entirely. He stood at attention, his back straight and his gaze fixed ahead, a simple yet profound act of respect. The entire diner fell silent, the clinking of silverware stopped, even the chatter from the other tables quieted. For a moment, no one moved, no one spoke. All eyes were now on the colonel, who stood behind Ray's seat, his posture rigid and formal, as if he were guarding something sacred. His action, though silent, conveyed more than any speech could have. It was an unspoken declaration. Ray Dawson deserved respect, not because of his age, not because of his injuries, but because he had served and in doing so had earned it. The group of men at the corner booth sat frozen, their earlier mockery now replaced by uncertainty. Their eyes shifted from Harrison to Ray, and as they saw the quiet strength in the old Marine, their smiles faded. What had seemed like harmless teasing moments ago now felt like a grave misstep. Harrison didn't need to say a word, his actions spoke volumes. Marissa, the waitress, stood behind the counter, watching everything unfold. Her heart raced as she saw Harrison's gesture, a wave of gratitude and understanding washing over her. She had been unsure of how to respond to the cruelty moments ago, but now, in the quiet stillness, she understood. Sometimes words weren't necessary, sometimes a single act of respect could change everything. The diners in the room, those who had been quietly observing, were now fully engaged in the moment. Some of them shifted uncomfortably in their seats, others simply watched, moved by the simple yet powerful display of respect. No one spoke, but everyone understood. It was as if the entire diner had collectively held its breath, waiting for this silent acknowledgement of dignity. Ray, who had been quietly eating his meal, didn't look up at first, but as the silence stretched on, he felt the weight of Harrison's presence behind him. Slowly, he lifted his eyes, catching the reflection of the colonel in the window beside him. In that brief moment, their gazes met, and an unspoken understanding passed between them. They were comrades, bound by shared experience, by the understanding that sometimes the greatest respect was shown not through words, but through actions. The group of men at the corner booth finally seemed to come to terms with what had just happened. Their faces were no longer filled with derision, but with something else, something closer to shame. They didn't know what to say, and for once, they didn't need to say anything. The truth had been made clear. For a full 30 seconds, the diner remained silent. No one moved, no one spoke. The only sounds were the soft hum of the kitchen fan in the back and the distant noise of traffic outside. And in that silence, Ray Dawson, with his quiet resilience, had shown everyone in the room what it meant to stand tall, not through force or anger, but through the dignity of simply being who you are. Finally, Harrison broke the silence. He shifted his stance, his posture still straight, but his eyes now turned toward the group of men who had mocked Ray. Without a word, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an old weathered photograph. He held it up for everyone in the diner to see. The photo was yellowed with age, its corners worn, but it was clear enough to see what it depicted: a much younger Ray Dawson in full combat gear leading a group of Marines through dense jungle. In his arms, he carried a wounded comrade. This man, Harrison's voice cut through the stillness, strong and steady, carried me out of a burning convoy outside Da Nang in 1972. 3 miles through enemy territory with a bullet in his own leg. He saved my life. He's the reason I'm alive today, the reason I have a family, the reason I wear this rank. Harrison lowered the photograph slightly, making eye contact with the men who had mocked Ray. Sergeant Dawson is the reason I'm standing here today. Ray, ever calm, continued to eat, his hands steady despite the shaking of his aging fingers. He didn't need to say anything. His life, his service, had spoken for him. The men in the corner booth, once full of bravado, now shrank in their seats, their faces flushed with embarrassment and their eyes turned away from Ray. They had learned something today, though they may not have fully understood it yet. They had learned that respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned, and for Ray Dawson, it had been earned long ago, the entire diner had fallen into a profound silence, the atmosphere heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. Colonel James Harrison stood tall, his posture unwavering, still at attention behind Ray's booth. The laughter had stopped, the mocking had ceased, all that remained was the stillness thick with unspoken understanding. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition, some just need to know that today. Someone isn't going hungry, and sometimes that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Graceful Valor Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.